Good morning all and welcome to the State of Service Roadshow event for South Australia. My name is Hilary Schubert-Jones and I will be your MC and facilitator today, which I'm delighted to say is also International Women's Day. Hashtag cracking the code. Thank you everyone for joining us online today. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians whose country I present from today. For me, that is Ghana country, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present. I would also like to extend that acknowledgement to the traditional custodians on whose country that you are participating from today. I'd like to give, firstly, a little overview of how today will run. To start with, we'll be using Slido for some public service trivia. Then we'll have our keynote address, which will be delivered by the Australian Public Service Deputy Commissioner, Subho Banerjee, followed by a short panel discussion, and then your questions will be answered by our panel. All questions can be submitted via the question and answer function on the Slido chat. I'd encourage you to submit those questions as soon as you think of them. Don't leave them too long because we potentially will run out of time to answer all of the questions submitted. So there should be a QR code on your screen now that will take you to the Slido. You simply take out your mobile and scan that code. You can also enter the number on the screen at the Slido's website that's on the screen now for you and join from your browser. For those of you who are on site, you should see the first question coming up now. There will be 20 seconds on the clock for everyone to answer before we show the correct answer. Question 1, what is the most popular male name for Australian public servants in South Australia? The answer is Michael. The second question is, which is the most popular female name for Australian public servants in South Australia? I have a feeling it's not Hilary. So the answer to the most popular female name is Michelle. There you go. What do you think is the average age of an Australian public servant in South Australia? Interesting one. The answer to the average age is 44. Interesting. And our last question, what are the top 3 most common countries of birth outside of Australia for South Australian APS employees, do you think? So the 3 most common countries are England, India, and the Philippines. There are some interesting questions and insightful answers. Thank you everyone who played along with that. Hopefully we will learn something today. So I would now like to invite Subho Banerjee, the Australian Public Service Deputy Commissioner, to deliver the keynote address. Subho, thank you.
Thanks very much, Hilary. It's fantastic to join you all today. My name is Subho Banerjee. I'm the Deputy Commissioner at the APSC, Head of the APS Academy and Capability, a relatively recent appointment here at the APSC, and it's fantastic to be joining you today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm speaking to you from today, the Ngunnawal people here in Canberra and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend those respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on the call today, more generally in the APSC and indeed in the APS. And can I also mark International Women's Day? It's great to be on a panel, particularly with Hilary, of course. We're conscious of our gender balance here today as well, but we've invited, we'll make sure that we try and consider a range of different perspectives in the conversation as we go forward. It's fantastic to join you, as I say. I'm sorry that I'm not able to make it to South Australia today. I'm actually due to come over with the Commissioner in a couple of weeks' time, so we're looking forward to a trip to South Australia. We're very conscious that the APS is a genuinely national institution, and so one of the great pleasures of the Roadshow is really to talk to people, talk to public servants all over the country, and to hear views from the length and breadth of Australia, and to really understand a little bit more about your experiences wherever you are, and also to talk a little bit about some of the things that bind us together as public servants. I'll be talking a little bit today about some of the kind of broader themes coming from the State of the Service report. And one of the things that, of course, we should start with is an acknowledgement of the challenges faced by the public service. The operating environment is complex. Just in the last year, we've been conscious of going through the ongoing economic and social challenges from the after effects of COVID-19, a range of natural disasters and other challenges from that, recent geopolitical disruptions across the world, and also a consciousness that we are in some very tight economic circumstances, both in terms of cost pressures, but also in terms of competing in a tight labour market for staff amongst a national skills shortage. That really puts the pressure on the APS to be able to deliver effectively within that complex operating environment. And the government has laid out an APS reform agenda which places some priorities for the APS to continue its journey to make sure that it's operating as effectively as it can. The government's APS reform agenda priorities are to make sure that the APS embodies integrity in everything it does, that it puts people and business at the centre of policy and services, so that it's a model employer, and that it has the capability to do its job well. Through this reform agenda, which is a continuation of a long-running institutional reform for the APS, we'll look to continue to build trust, collaborate, learn, and be a great place to work, and meet the challenges of an increasingly complex and interconnected world. One of the ways in which the APS is doing this is through the APS Academy, which is relatively newly established and is one of the functions that I'm responsible for here in the APSC. The Academy provides an integrated whole-of-service approach to capability development, learning and development across the APS. The idea is that it's a networked model, that it connects all the way across the service, that it is able to think a little bit about what constitutes excellence in public service, and then how people can be supported to be able to deliver on that. Importantly, we've been thinking and working on a continuous learning model that is much more than just the formal learning through formal instruction, but also talks about the importance of connecting to people, coaching, mentors, other resources, all the informal ways in which you need to learn in your workplace and be supported in your workplace to do the most effective job that you can. As I mentioned, we've been putting a lot of thought into what are the domains of excellence for being a public servant, and that's really embodied in our language in terms of the APS craft. I'd encourage you to have a look on the website, the APS Academy website, which goes through the different areas of craft, which are really particular to what it means to be a public servant, what it means to pursue the vocation of public service, whether that's for a short period of time to make a contribution or whether it's a lifelong career. It's really understanding the public purpose, understanding our institutional place within the national democracy, and understanding how we can fulfil that most effectively. As well as looking on the website, I'd encourage you to sign up for the My Academy newsletter, which will give you a sense both of activities that are underway, many of which are online and can be accessed from anywhere in the country, but also a way of connecting to the conversation about craft areas so that you can think about what is applicable to you now and what areas of interest you might want to develop further into the future. We'll put a link in the Teams chat for you, in the chat for you for that. When we talk about craft, we're very conscious that integrity needs to sit at the centre of everything that we do. What is special about being a public servant? It is to operate in the public trust. It is to serve the public, serve the government of the day in an accountable way through ministers to Parliament in a form that ensures public trust, ensures responsible proper use of public money, and ensures that decision making is done in a transparent and credible way that delivers on that duty to make sure that we are properly a democratic institution. The APSC has been doing a lot of work in thinking about learning offerings in integrity to really draw out just why it's so central for all of us as public servants to think about integrity. It is what marks us out. It is what makes this workplace different. It is what makes this institution different to innumerable other places that you might be, whether it's in a not-for-profit, whether it's in the private sector, whether it's in a university. The requirement to directly serve the government of the day in a way that maintains public trust is the core of being a public servant. And so I'd really encourage you to, again, have a think about what that means in your particular workplace. What does it mean to act with integrity as a public servant, and to make sure that we all both model those behaviours, that we make sure that it's not just talking the talk, but that we do walk the walk in terms of integrity. This connects to a lot of work that's been underway through the Secretaries Board on leadership behaviours. Secretaries have released a charter of leadership behaviours, which again is available online. And I'd encourage you to have a look at that. It sets out very clearly the expectations from the senior leaders of the service of public servants. And again, it's really trying to get to what is particular, what is different, and what is held in trust for us, for the public at large. I'll go now to briefly to some workforce issues before we get into the broader panel conversation. One of the things that I wanted to highlight for you today is that the State of the Service report shows that mobility across the APS is increasing, and we're really encouraging that. Thinking about one APS, thinking about the possibility of flexibility across the APS, both allows us to deliver more effectively by deploying resources where they're most needed, but it also gives people an opportunity to develop their career in different and interesting ways. I'd really encourage you to think about the possibility of different secondments, different connections, different short-term opportunities. There is a mobility framework in place to try and encourage this sort of work or this sort of placement. And to make sure that agencies are welcoming, both on the receiving end and on the giving end, to make sure that that works effectively for staff. If you are interested in temporary opportunities, you can visit the APS Jobs website and go to the Temporary Opportunities tab, which has been set up specifically to try and make this easier for you. In addition, we've been doing a lot of work from the APSC in thinking about skilled workforce, thinking about workforce planning and how the overall workforce strategy can be delivered. I mentioned in my opening remarks that we're very conscious of a tight labour market and indeed increasing skill shortages in some key areas going forward. One of the things that we really need to think about is how to open up different pathways for people so that they can connect to the kinds of jobs that we're going to need in the future. There's some really interesting work going underway in that as well. And again, I'd encourage you to think about what amongst that might appeal to you, particularly in terms of the specific professions that have been set up, where there's a lot of professional support in data, digital and HR in particular, but also thinking about a range of other specialist expertise and how that can be applied within the public service. There's also a lot of work underway in thinking more broadly about the future of work. There's a Secretary's subcommittee on the future of work that is thinking about the employee value proposition for public servants, trying to set out clearly what it is that we mean, why the public service can be a fantastic place to work, why it can be incredibly rewarding and varied, and a chance to make a public contribution in a really wonderful way. We're also doing some work on flexibility, supporting secretaries to do some work on flexibility, which is really grappling with all the different elements of what flexibility means, particularly in a post-COVID era. So flexibility in terms of thinking about location, flexibility in terms of thinking about hours, flexibility in terms of thinking about job roles, but really keeping in mind all the time that that has to be a mutually beneficial conversation. It's got to work for the individual, it's got to work for the team, and it's got to work for the organisation as a whole. All of those are legitimate and important parts of the conversation. Of course, we want flexibility to allow people to make sure that they can live their lives in a way that works best for them and allows them to balance a range of different things in their world. But empirical research and indeed the APS census results show that it's at the team level that a really careful consideration of how you set out what you need to do, what the different roles are, and how flexibility can work in that is the really crucial factor in trying to get this through. And then at the organisational level, there is a legitimate and important part of thinking about work culture, thinking about what it means to be in the APS, and making sure that the overall settings are consistent with that, and that these things can be done with equity, with fairness across an organisation, that you're not just getting case-by-case individual conversations, you are actually getting some benchmarking and some understanding of how that might be applied. In closing, I think it's a really exciting time to be part of the APS. It's an exciting time to be part of the broader reform process, as well as an exciting time in broader public policy and government terms. I'd encourage all of you to not only continue the important work that you currently do, but also to take a bit of an interest in broader APS issues in the kinds of ways that we're talking about today. Obviously, you've dialed in today, so you've self-selected in that regard, but also to make sure that you take care of yourselves and one another to make sure that we really do have productive, effective workplaces all the way across the country. Thank you again for tuning in today, and I look forward to participating in the panel. Thanks, Hilary.
Lovely, thank you so much, Subho. That was such an informative talk, and I'm very much looking forward to some further contributions in the panel from you. So the State of Service Roadshow is an annual occasion where we come together and talk through ideas for public service. We can also share our stories and experiences. So the Australian Public Service Commission is capturing some of those stories. We'll now show you a trailer of some of the stories that have been captured so far.
My name is Leanne. I'm based in Canberra. I work at the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and this is my story.
Hello, my name is Ben.
My name is Sanam Zafar.
My name's Hannah.
My name is Mohammed Al Abri.
I'm Grant Nicholson.
My name is Robin Edmonds.
My name's Andrew Pfeiffer.
Hey there, my name is Belle Hogg.
My name is Megan Kopatz, and this is my APS story. So I got to talk to different agencies, see inside their cultures and their initiatives and what they were doing, and I thought, wow, there's so much going on in the APS. I really need to broaden my horizons.
Starting out in service delivery, taking calls from Australians who were unemployed and hearing some stories that broke my heart, and that really started off a very rewarding time being able to help the Australian public, and that hasn't changed.
There's plenty of opportunity around now. They've got a thing called a development register, that if you're interested in developing your career and working your way up from maybe as a team leader.
I continue to learn and share all around government through the amazing communities that I've been involved with. There's a thing called the Digital Profession, and I'm running a visual scribing community. So we have local, state, federal, all kinds of different government agencies, departments that come together.
The advice that I would give to people is do experience time in other organisations. It's well worth it to expand your horizons and to go and spend time discovering what other agencies do and sharing your talent around. But at the same time, if you're comfortable in the organisation you're adding value there. There is value for the organisation in you staying for a period of time in the organisation.
Bring like-minded people together. We share webinars, we bring in speakers, and we hold events like clothes swaps. The next big event we're trying to hold is an APS-wide event for Clean Up Australia Day on the 5th of March 2023. We hope to see you there.
I started up their neurodiversity network, which grew to 400 members in 1 year. And I was super thrilled that the ATO supported me in co-founding their network.
And so we decided to bring people together for a bit of a meeting just to explore what it was that agencies were already doing, what they were maybe aware of, what they thought were opportunities and what they really wanted to learn. So we kind of wanted to have this exploratory meeting just to, I guess, gauge the level of interest and maturity, if you will, right, with neurodiversity awareness and inclusion across the APS.
So there was so much support because I was at the learning stage. People were there to support me, help me, gave me like the network and development opportunities, but within APS6 is something I have to find on my own. But it's really amazing and challenging for me because this was something I was looking for, that where I can challenge myself, get out of the comfort zone, and maybe an inspiration for others.
My highlight was definitely the evaluation workshop I led, because it directly led to the agency changing its HR processes in a meaningful way, so I thought it was very impactful. My key takeaway from this whole experience working on the project is that each and every person has the power to create change.
Thank you. So now we move on to our panel discussion. Just a reminder, if you do have a question for the panel, please do send it through that slide question and answer chat function. As soon as you think of it, don't sit on that question, put it through. Okay. If you do see a question already asked and you want to hear the answer to that question, please do make sure that you vote that question up, because the more votes a question gets, the more likely it's going to be asked to our panel. So I would now like to introduce all of our panelists. As we have, in addition to Schubert, we also will bring in Sam Usher, who is the Chief Executive Officer at the Australian Radioactive Waste Agency. And then we also have Bruce Warrington, the Chief Metrologist and CEO at the National Measurement Institute, which is a division of the Department of Industry, Science and Resources. Thank you all for joining us today. I have a couple of questions to kick us off, and then we'll bring in some audience questions as those come through. So our first question, staff have answered in the census that work-life balance and work satisfaction are two of the most important qualities to their work. Schubert, you've already touched on this a little bit in your keynote, but I think more specifically, I'd like to ask the panel, what advice can you share with teams to help create a culture where this is a main focal point? Sam, would you like to kick us off with this one?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel today. The Australian Radioactive Waste Agency is a relatively new agency within the Department of Industry, Science and Resources, and so that gives us a great opportunity to build the culture and set something that we as the agency wish to take forward. There are different challenges that we have, of course, and I'm not saying that we've got it right yet. Developing culture is an ongoing journey, and we're very open to learning and putting improvements in place. So this is very much a work in progress. But there are a couple of areas where we've been quite deliberate in how we're setting our culture. The work that we do in the Australian Radioactive Waste Agency it's complex, it's challenging, and we're often balancing competing and often conflicting interests as well. And the work that we do is very complex in that we might be trying to deliver some technical work, but it has legal implications. There are implications that we have with our local community, Indigenous engagement, and Indigenous communities that we work with in what is often a sort of a febrile political and policy environment as well. So everything that we do is sort of connected. And so we've developed this sort of 1 hour culture, if you like, where we recognise and embrace that complexity in the work that we're doing, and aim to work collaboratively together to develop and deliver our programme, recognising that that's how it fits together. The second thing in where we've been deliberate is that we've put quite a lot of work in over the last 12 months really, as a whole organisation, in developing a set of principles and behaviours which guide the culture that we're looking to do. We've engaged everybody across the workforce to do that, and we now have a sort of agreed set of words, if you like. This covers things like focusing with the end in mind, working together with empathy and collaboratively. Of course, we have these words, but the challenge is how we bring that to life. And so we need to work together and hold each other to account in exploring and applying the behaviours that we have. So I give those as a couple of examples about how we're trying to engage the whole workforce together into building a culture that I think can really engage people in the complexity of the work, give them a stake in the work that we're doing, and I do believe that helps create that work satisfaction, that job satisfaction that we need.
Awesome, thank you. Bruce, your thoughts on this, please.
Thank you. This is about work-life balance, particularly.
Yeah.
So I think Sam's exactly right that you have to be intentional about culture. Some of the challenges that people experience in finding that balance come when we haven't talked about expectations properly, when people think they're being held to an expectation which isn't really true, or when managers maybe aren't fully aware of all of the pressures an individual is facing. So, and that on International Women's Day may be particularly true for women, for example. So I think having a commitment to being open to those kinds of communications is kind of where you need to start from. You really need to try and foster an environment where people can talk as openly as they feel able to about the challenges that they're facing, and then it becomes a shared problem. How can we facilitate the work that the team needs or the organization needs, but still find that balance for the individual? I think some of the to make it really, really concrete, some of the tiny little things that maybe go without saying, but maybe not. Maybe we need to say these more often. So some of the things I try and do is not unintentionally send the wrong signals. So if I send an email late at night or over the weekend, usually that's because I'm choosing to do that because it helps me manage other pressures that I might have in my life. But if I'm not honest about that and share that, that's why I'm doing it, then people assume that that's what's expected. And so you have to be upfront about that. One other tiny thing is, I think it also helps in work contexts that might be seen as relatively formal to talk about things that happen outside work, because that kind of gives license for that conversation. Reminds everybody else that, you know, even people who've got particular responsibilities in the organization also have a life outside it, and they're similarly trying to find the balance. So that's just some practical things from me.
I do like that thread of everyone has things outside of work and everyone is balancing things to really make that a key focus is really interesting. And Subho, do you have something to add specifically on how teams can help create that culture? I know you spoke about work-life balance in your keynote, but any tips or tricks that people can take away potentially?
Sure. Can I start by supporting Bruce's very practical and tangible suggestion? I think the email culture is actually a really important signifier. Something that's really easy to do on Outlook is to batch send your emails for Monday morning. You know, if they're not urgent, send them at the start of the working week, and then people can start taking things up. But also, as Bruce said, making it really clear that what's for response and what's not, and that these particularly high pressure jobs do require some responsiveness at times. When you're calling on that, to make that the exception, not the expectation or the rule, there's a lot of empirics around people's kind of stress levels are very strongly related to feeling on call. And so that kind of sense of trying as a senior person to be really quite explicit about on call or not on call, and the on call bit being very rare, I think is actually a tangible and clear way into that conversation. The other thing I'd mention that is also quite clear in the empirics is that managing flexible work is a serious and important management challenge, and we need to think about the toolkit required for that. We need to think about the capability amongst managers to be able to do that. We need to support managers to be able to do that. But what the empirics are showing is that a lot of the things that are most important in managing flexible work are actually sort of fundamentals of managing teams well. And so real clarity in communication, clarity in roles and responsibilities, a degree of building the right team culture so that people do both feel supported but also look to support their other teammates. These things are just genuinely good things. Like they're not absolutely specifically flexible work good things, they're just good things in managing teams. But I think flexible work really puts a spotlight on our fundamentals, and to make sure that we are absolutely nailing those. And I think in some ways it introduces some other pressures that then really show up if you're not getting your fundamentals right. And so that's been a really interesting part of how we've been thinking about supporting managers and trying to create the right kind of environment for people to flourish.
Beautiful, thank you. Okay, moving on now to our next question. Again, thinking about culture. The census saw that only 63% of respondents in South Australia felt comfortable discussing mental health and wellbeing with their supervisor. What do you think can be done to change this and to create this safer, more supportive environment in teams that realistically we do need to achieve? Bruce, can I come to you first for this one, please?
Sure, thank you. This is a real challenge. I think we're making some progress, but it's clear that we've got quite a long way to go. And the State of the Service report results say that. They also highlight how big an issue it is for us, and so we've got some momentum, I think. Maybe if I share just a little bit of experience from where we sit within the APS. So our workforce, the National Measurement Institute, what does that do? It's everything from scientists in laboratories keeping Australia's top level measurement standards, and those are things that through COVID needed to continue, and so people still had some connection and still some environment in which to share some of those challenges that everybody was facing through that time. But we also have a regulatory role where people check supermarket scales and petrol pumps, all the things that people maybe don't think about. And those we couldn't really say were essential through the pandemic. And so people who were so used to being out and connected in the community were suddenly stuck at home, the same way many of us were, many citizens. So paradoxically, the COVID pandemic gave us more of a framework for being deliberate about that and saying, okay, the challenges of getting through COVID include supporting everybody across that whole spectrum. So yes, it's about the safety in the environment where people have to come into work and managing COVID transmission risks and so on, but it's also about supporting the mental health challenges for people who are suddenly faced with working in a very different way, maybe doing different work than they're used to. And I would like to hope that some of that commitment to the conversation is continuing for us. And I do think that's part of how you can open up the conversation is saying we're often reasonably good, or particularly where there are physical hazards in our work, we're particularly good at thinking about our physical health and safety, where the hazards are really obvious and in front of you, and you have to think about control mechanisms and awareness and mutual support. But supporting mental health and well-being challenges is not as open and visible, and so carrying over those challenges that we're kind of used to in one space into another is the key opportunity for us. Just finally, so how will we know when we've really got there? So we're really used to the idea that you can take a personal leave day for an injury or a physical challenge. You need some time to work through something. You have a conversation with your manager. Are we at the point where you could say, I need a mental health day? I need a break. In some places, I would say we are, and it depends a lot on the level of trust in the team. In some places, we're not. How do we really get there from there? How do we say, yes, that's part of what supporting people through tough times, whether it's a physical or a mental challenge, that's where we need to be.
Yeah, okay. Subho, your thoughts on this one, please.
So I might just mention, Hilary, firstly, that the APSC has a mental health and suicide prevention unit that specifically does work connecting across the service to make sure that our overall frameworks are sound and being implemented in the right way across agencies. And they've developed a learning offering called Compassionate Foundations, which again, we can drop the link in the chat, but it's really highly recommended. And so it's an opportunity for everyone to connect to these issues. I think I'd go back to a little bit of what I was saying before, but also connect to Bruce. I think openness is absolutely key. And I would say openness in a broader sense in Australian society, there is a much more willingness to talk about issues in general to do with mental health, which is a wholly healthy thing. There is no doubt that taking care of your mental health is getting much closer to parity, with a sense of you just talk about that like you're dealing with your mental health, with your physical health. So, you know, the idea of going to a psychologist is about really thinking about where you're going mentally, how you're going, what kind of coaching or advice you can get. It's really a much more normalised form of connecting to broader support networks and taking care of yourself, as it should be in a range of different ways. So I think that's a wholly healthy thing in broader Australian society, and I think it's something that it's important for us to be as open about that in the workplace. And again, connecting to something Bruce said previously, I think talking about your broader life as is appropriate in a workplace helps to normalise that as well.
Yeah, I pick up on both you're saying about normalising things, and that's how we get culture change, is to normalise them and talk about them in wholly positive ways rather than obviously any disparaging ways. So lovely. Sam, is there anything you'd like to add to this conversation?
Well, thank you. Yes, so perhaps a couple of things I can build on what Bruce and Subho have said. Within our work, we will in due course become an operator of nuclear facilities, and so developing a strong safety culture is absolutely critical to our work. But I would build on what Bruce says. Safety culture is not just physical safety; it's about mental health and well-being as well. And so we are again trying to take an active role in promoting mental health and well-being. Let me give a couple of examples. In significant meetings we will have an acknowledgement of country, and then following that, we will, as part of our culture, we will have a safety thought where we can reflect on something, whether that's physical safety, but also mental health or mental well-being as well, so that we're normalising that part of as an important part of our work. We've also set up within our office a sort of a Thriving Minds Teams channel, where each week we put a sort of a hint or a suggestion to help with mental health. We have morning teas and afternoon teas to get people together, and we've got a sort of a brain break place where we have jigsaw puzzles for people to have a break as well. So again, these are sort of little signals to show people that it's okay to talk about these things. But I think perhaps one of the biggest things for me is the fact that whilst we see our work colleagues at work and we're focused on our work deliverables and our work programme, but all of us have our lives outside of work, and it's generally probably in our outside of work where a lot of the mental many mental stresses or mental health issues might start to evolve. Family lives, are complex. We have children. Many people have children who are at different phases in schools and relationships, etc. Some of us might have elderly parents that are coming up with illness. Our partners might be going through different challenges, for example. And all of those kind of things we all care about work, but family will always trump work, I think. And so really I think it's important that we take an interest in our work colleagues' lives outside of work for as long as we feel comfortable to talk about that, and to really understand that when people come to work, they might be a little bit down or something. It may or may not be about work. It might be about something that's bothering or something significant going on outside. And so taking time to get to know our colleagues both in and out of work and helping provide that support, I think is an important role for us in terms of how we work collaboratively and with empathy across our organisation.
Lovely. Thank you. Some really good actionable steps, I think, in there as well. I love that idea of the safety thought in meetings. Might have to try and put that in my team meetings now as well. Okay, so we've got a question come through from the audience. So thinking a little bit about diversity and equity, something very close to my heart. How do we ensure there are greater opportunities for people with disabilities in the APS, not just attracting those, but then actually retaining and promoting them as well? Subho, can I come to you first for this one, please?
Sure, this is an absolutely crucial issue, and the APSC has been doing some work on behalf of the service in thinking about broader support for people with a disability in the workforce and in the APS. I think, again, we've made some progress, but there's still a lot of work to do in making sure that that support is genuinely delivered in a way that is meaningful in individual work contexts. Again, we can supply some links in the chat to indicate some of the work that's been underway.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. Sam, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is an area where there's a lot more that we can do in that, and I think we are we've made more progress in other areas of diversity than perhaps this area at the moment. I'm thinking if there's more that can be done when we're recruiting, whether there's more work that we can do with, excuse me, be a bit more imaginative in how we can target and advertise opportunities and work with recruitment agencies or panel, organisations on panels to actually really promote and say what can we do more to attract people to a range of people with a range of skills and abilities to the opportunities that we've got. So I'm sure there's a lot more we can do in that area.
Definitely. Bruce, your thoughts, please.
Thank you. Look, I just echo some of the comments that have been made already. I think the only thing I could add, some of the challenge about the sort of disability access for inclusion is starting with the way we talk about the deficit narrative. Essentially, you can't, if you're not careful and intentional, you tend to start to think about overcoming some of those deficits instead of taking advantage of the different perspectives, the different skills, the different contributions for a broad and diverse workforce, the same way we're always trying to do with diversity and inclusion. So that's part of a particular challenge for the one particular example. I think this is changing, but if you think about neurodiversity, if you frame it as a disability in the sense that it's a difference somehow in the way in which you engage in the workplace or the way in which you engage with your colleagues, then you start from quite a different place than if you talk about it as neurodiversity and as a particular gift and skill that comes with the particular human approach for the individual. I work in a partly scientific, partly regulatory place, which it may not surprise you has a fair number of neurodiverse people, and the skills that those people have are exactly the skills that the APS need in different roles. And so it is about identifying that broader narrative and the broader contribution rather than starting from a deficit framing.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. I have a particular passion for neurodiversity, inclusion, and a term I've heard used previously has been, instead of thinking about things as disability, thinking about things as diversibility, and how that diversity really adds richness to a workforce, and therefore doing everything we can to include different perspectives and opinions. Very good. Okay, our next question from the audience coming through is a very hot topic. What work is being done to close the gap on pay scales between departments? I'm gonna come to you again, Subho, first for this one.
Sure, thanks, Hilary. So as people on the call would know, the government has committed to a APS-wide bargaining framework and process that is literally now underway. So the chief negotiator, Peter Reardon, is based in the APSC and has taken the formal steps with agency heads as is required in various forms of legislation and regulation to get that underway. He has indicated that he expects formal bargaining to be underway by the end of March. And so beyond that, it's now in the discussion and the conversation, so there's not much I can say in terms of the detail, except to say that the government has indicated that it would prefer to see more consistency. It would prefer to see a more unified approach where that is possible, where that makes sense, across agencies, that they feel like the proliferation of recent years, it's quite a few years across governments of different types, has been difficult to manage. It's been difficult to manage for employees, and it's been difficult to manage for government. And so the broader principle of trying to think about some consolidation has been set out by the government, and now it's a matter of a formal bargaining process.
Okay, just to not exclude you from the conversation, Sam and Bruce, do either of you have anything to add on this?
I might add one, if that's okay. Thanks, Hilary. Just again, a little bit from our experience, where we had slightly different pay scales within one enterprise agreement that came from different kind of previous technical pathways and machinery of government changes. And just reflecting on the experience of attempting to redress inequities in that, even in that small scenario, it takes a real commitment from everyone. It is actually a bargaining process has many voices in it, and rightly so. It's set up to have everybody to say what's important for them, and it really takes everybody to think carefully about what will be best, not just for the individual, but for the service as a whole in the end, to really make progress, I suspect. Everybody gets their own voice in that conversation. I guess we're looking forward to it in the framing that Subho has outlined.
Beautiful. Okay, Sam?
Yeah, no, thank you. I hope I'm not going to get in trouble with Subho here, but I think what the work that we're trying to do in the Radioactive Waste Agency is first of a kind in Australia, and it's technically very challenging, and even in countries with very mature and much larger nuclear industries than we have here in Australia, the work that we're doing is difficult and challenging, and we're working in a competitive market. The nuclear industry in Australia is growing, and so I think there is an extent that we have to recognise that we're in a market as well. I think what we are doing, and what I can say we are doing, is that we are looking to coordinate with the other nuclear agencies in Australia, so that we don't just end up getting in a a poaching arms race, if you like, that we are looking to establish, for example, similar graduate programs, similar training programs, so that we can, we're all supportive of each other. But I think there is I can see a tension between, on the one hand, looking to standardise and harmonise terms and conditions, but also that doesn't always work when you're trying to develop very specialist and technical skills that are necessary to deliver, complex work programs. So I offer that as a not sure whether that's a helpful comment, Subho, but perhaps it's a view from our work.
Lots of different views.
Important. Yeah, it's a really important and legitimate point that we need to think very carefully about specialist skills, about being able to source people that are truly excellent in the roles that we need. And so there's absolutely no doubt, Sam, that we're going to have to think very carefully about that across a range of different examples. Yours, of course, is a very pertinent one. There are, as well as very spiky, relatively small labour market needs, there are some very spiky, broader-based ones in some technical competencies like digital data or other places. So that's absolutely what we're going to have to think through as we go. But it might be time to dust off that PhD in physics, Sam.
Yeah.
So
Okay, the next question that's come through for our audience, I believe, has been posed specifically for yourself, Subho. However, I do think all panel members might have some practical steps here. So following the Robodebt Royal Commission evidence, how can we ensure that APS provides frank and fearless advice without fear of repercussions? So Subho.
Yeah, look, I've been following the Robodebt testimony very closely, as you would expect, as indeed has the Commissioner and senior people across the public service. I think there is no doubt that we need to think very, very carefully about the public service's institutional role, and we need to think very carefully about what that means as a senior leadership group. There's been a lot of reflection on that, including from the Commissioner and the head of PM&C, the Secretary for Public Sector Reform, have all been thinking and talking about what this means in terms of our broader institutional role, the culture that underpins that, what it means to provide the most effective, the most useful and the most proper advice. And I think as we work through the findings that will come from the Royal Commission, that will be something that will be very much front of mind for senior leaders in the service. There's absolutely no doubt that it is very much on our minds to think about what are the range of different things that have come up and what needs to be done to reinforce, I think, the enduring values that are codified in the APS values around exactly these things. So I think it will certainly be, well, it is a time of self-reflection. It will be important to show and to meaningfully act in a way that really reinforces the importance of providing proper and effective advice.
Thank you. Sam, can I come to you next?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I don't think I've got too much to add to this other than just to reflect on Subho's point earlier about the importance of integrity, and that's fundamental to the APS and how we should act in that. So I think that this is just an example that's highlighted that.
Yeah, I agree. Bruce, do you have anything more to
add? Just one thing maybe, which is to reflect on, so there's a temptation to think that those challenges only play out at a particular level, that they only play out in interactions with ministers or senior levels of government or at a high level in the APS. I don't think that's right. I think the challenge and the opportunity is to empower those conversations, the ability to speak up when you don't think something is right. That's a challenge that goes all the way down and deep into the whole of the APS. And so our challenge is to hit that head on, to highlight the central role that integrity has, and in our different operations, whatever roles we do, to be clear about what role integrity has in delivering that responsibility to maximum effect in an ethical and correct way. And if we do that right, then as people take on more responsibility in their career progression, the people who will end up in those really serious conversations have that built in. It's baked into APS values and to APS delivery. That's, I think, the opportunity.
Yeah, and that's something everyone watching today can take away an action and put in their day-to-day work in living that integrity and asking why of things. Beautiful. We are fast galloping towards our endpoint, unfortunately. This has been an exciting panel for me, very interesting answers coming up. So our last question that we have time for comes from the audience, and it says, I've been in the APS for 20 plus years. The last 10 years, governments have gutted the APS capability, and not kept up with paying conditions. How do you think the APS can now rebuild? So, Bruce, can I come to you first for this one?
Oh, all the easy ones.
Right.
I think this will sound a bit like dodging the question, but I don't think it is. The APS has always had the challenge of evolving its capability to meet the needs of today, because the needs of today carry over in part from the needs of yesterday, but they're always new. And so I think any leader in the APS, not just a positional leader, but anyone who's leading where they are, has the responsibility of saying, not just how do I do my job, but how do I help others do theirs? How do I grow that capability for the needs that we face now? If we're really grappling with that properly, if we're really thinking carefully about where we prioritize our resources, if we bring in some of those other aspects, particularly the APS craft that Subho mentioned about putting people and businesses at the center of what we do and so on, then I think that's how you would solve that problem, regardless of how big or small it is at any particular point. So one of the things that resonates really strongly for me in the APS is this concept of stewardship, not just holding things static and as they always have been, but setting them up for the future. And if we're really committed to that, then that's our best response to that challenge, I think.
Okay. Sam, your thoughts on this?
Thank you. Well, I've only been with the APS for about 1 year, and I've been fortunate. I've moved to Australia with my family a year ago, so my reference point is the UK. Where I've worked in both the civil service in the UK and in the private sector. And what I've been struck with in that year is really how proud and progressive the APS is in terms of this service for the whole of Australia. And I would say my observation, it's been far more deliberate and conscious than I was used to in the UK, for example. So I think that's a real strength that we can build on, and is something that we shouldn't be, perhaps not to beat ourselves up too much on that, if you like. Certainly in that comparison I've got. I think the other point I would make is that working in the APS and in the private sector is different. There are different skills and challenges, and there's some swings and roundabouts that you get. That you have a little bit more process and bureaucracy in the APS, but on the other hand, you really are delivering something that's in the national interest. And I think there's more that can be done there to perhaps attract people from the private sector into with that sort of nominal contribution of service. I think is something that can be made to help strengthen it if we need to.
Yeah, I agree there. Thank you very much. Subho, your thoughts, please.
Thanks, Hilary. I mean, just echoing both Sam and Bruce, I think in international terms, the APS is very well regarded, but of course there are many things for us to continue to improve. And I think that sense of pride in the institution, pride in what we've been able to achieve, but also then pride, ambition, but humility in a sense of what we could achieve going forward. I think that really is the best sense of trying to state clearly, trying to demonstrate why this is important, to really pursue excellence and to make a contribution as an important national democratic institution. I think that's the heart of it. And then in that sense, through doing good work, we need to continue to make a good case, and making a good case should allow us to continue to thrive. I'm very optimistic about that. I'm very proud to be a public servant. I've been in and out of the public service a couple of different times, but I'm very drawn to the idea of making a broader public contribution, and I think the APS is a wonderful, wonderful place to be able to do that. I hope on the call our public servants listening in can also feel a degree of pride in the broader institution that they serve, and through that also make their contribution, take some responsibility, leadership at all levels, as you were saying, to try and make it a better place into the future. Thanks, Hilary.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's everyone has a responsibility to make it a good workplace and a good APS, and we all can do that. So interesting. So unfortunately, we have run out of time, and that brings our panel discussion to a close. I really would like to extend a genuine and warm thank you to all of our speakers, Subho, Sam, and Bruce. I would also like to thank everyone who's watching and has contributed questions or just by following along to this State of the Service Roadshow South Australia event. Before we sign out today, I'd very quickly like to share a quick note on the Australian Government Leadership Network, of which I'm the chair of the South Australian group. This leadership network sees APS staff of APS 6 and above come together both regularly in person and virtually to discuss ideas and connect. It's a great way to find out what's happening in other departments, other agencies, broaden your professional network and really gain a deeper understanding across APS. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, you can sign up via the APSC website. The events team should be putting the URL in the chat function now for you. So hopefully that's there for you. Also keep an eye out for a follow-up email from today's session that will have information about how you can show your share your own story of work in the APS, like the stories we saw earlier in the video package. So it will also have a link to the recording of today's session, so you can go back and see anything you'd like to again and recap any of the great thoughts that have been shared. Next week, the State of Service Roadshow will conclude with events for our Victorian and Northern Territory-based colleagues. Thank you very much for joining us today.